Okay, and we are live with our next webinar, our FYI webinar, and our series about media literacy. Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Simoes. This is a webinar presented by PALCUS, free to the entire community. And it's a special series dedicated to media literacy and helping us all figure out this mess of social media, mainstream media, alternative media, and how we engage, what do we believe, how does it affect our community? And so today we have Doctors Belinha de Abreu and Vitor Tomé, who are going to be taking us through a series of slides and talking about, what this all means. And so please share this
Great.
This webinar with family and friends, because I think the more conversation we have about this topic, the more educated we will be and being able to decipher what it is that we're seeing and reading in the media, and also have actually better relationships with people that disagree with us, whether that's our family member or friends, and we don't have to, defriend or or cut people out of our lives just because we have differing opinions. So without further ado, Dr. de Abreu, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back again. So we are continuing this discussion with civic engagement and civic society, in particular because we're heading up to the election season. And next month is midterms. And so it seems really appropriate to talk about the things that we need to engage more in our society, especially because at this point we are not as engaged as we should be, in part because of some of the things that you mentioned, Angela, where people have kind of disengaged. And so we're going to kind of go through that in a little bit of detail. With me today is Dr. Vitor Tomé, who couldn't be with us last time. And we're also going to, as part of our discussion, talk about digital citizenship, which is the extension of who we are in real life to our virtual worlds as well. And Vitor, would you like to just say a few words before we start?
Yes, thank you, Belinha. Hello, everyone. And first, I'd like to apologize because last time it was impossible for me. The internet connection was not good enough to participate. Yes, and it's an honor to be with you and to can cooperate with my colleague Belinha de Abreu. I don't know if she said a few words about me. I'm consultant at the Council of Europe and the European Commission, and I'm also teaching at the Autonomous University of Lisbon and working as a researcher at ISCTE, Institute University of Lisbon. In the last few years, I've been working as a teacher trainer also, and I have also trained journalists in media literacy and other topics.
Thank you. And part of our connection is that we met each other in Sweden in 2012 at a conference about media literacy. And from that 2010 actually. And from that point on, we have been doing work both together here in the United States as well as in Portugal, which is why I thought his voice was really important when it comes to the work that's being done, because it shows demographically not just what's happening here in the US, but also what is going on in Portugal as well as in Europe. So with that, I wanted to sort of situate us back to where we were, because this is sort of what bridged the conversation to media literacy, that we're sort of in the mix of all of these conversations from all of these different news networks and other places, and we don't really know where to go and what direction we're heading in and who to believe any longer, which has really been part of the problem. And in our last conversation, we spent some time really talking about this idea of what media literacy is and being able to think more thoughtfully about the media, about who created the messages, what grabs our attention, what language is grabbing us, that we are listening to it, what are people saying in the media or in social media, whatever it may be that's out there, but then asking, what is it about it that grabs my attention? And then also with that, looking at how different people are experiencing the same media messages. We sit in rooms with people that we believe have our same belief system, and then through other dialogue and conversation, and sometimes through very angry conversation, we find out that people very much have a different belief system. But besides that, they see the media very differently because of their perspective and their point of view. So really important for us to recognize is that we may see the same kinds of things on our media platforms, but depending on who we are, whether it's our religious beliefs, our social economics, where we live in the country, where we live around the world, whether we are in a Portuguese community or a non-Portuguese community, even where we are in Portuguese communities around the US and around the world, are also experiencing very much different media messages. And that has had impact in the way in which we dialogue and think about the influences of media and what we believe and what we don't believe. Within that, embedded values and points of view. So, to recognize that those values and points of views are represented in the media, and sometimes they are very much not our own, which has always been something that is very contrary to the beliefs that I think parents want to embed even in their children, why parents in particular get worried about the kinds of things that they see in the media. And ultimately looking at, why is this media message being sent to me? That has had a major impact as well. So, and we should all know that all media are there to gain profit. Not one media agency is out there for philanthropic purposes. They're very much out there because they want to get our attention. And so that has put us in this spectrum where we're always invested in these media choices and always online. So that brings us to today's talk. And I wanted to start with this quote, which is, "A small group of thoughtful people could change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that it ever has." And with civic media and civic engagement, and we think of civic society, that is literally kind of the fundamental theme that kind of underscores everything. When we are participants in the world around us, when we engage in our communities, when we think about others, that is where the scope and change is with our society, and in fact should have impact on the media itself. But it has kind of reversed itself, so that the media has impacted us, so that that becomes the engagement and frankly the disengagement with society. So what is civic engagement? I think we needed to sort of really think about, what does it mean, and why is it important with media literacy? Well, it's basically the intentional action of individuals or groups to participate in democracy. And it doesn't mean necessarily about running for office, but even the very act of helping your neighbor, or thinking about your community, worrying about what's happening in an area. Do we have, if we think of the festivals, what do the Portuguese festivals, what do we offer our community when we do the Portuguese festivals? I even think about the work of PALCUS. What are we doing in many ways to educate ourselves and our others, and using our gifts and talents and resources to contribute to the community at large, and advocating for positive change. So this is the great scope of where civic engagement lies. It's about being an effective and responsible citizen. It's not about hiding behind our phones or behind the platforms that don't allow us to engage. It's about promoting the quality of life in our community, which is why it's really important to be aware of our civic society, to know what our community is, to understand who lives within the community. It's a fulfillment to our responsibility to humanity. It is an out piece of ourselves and into the world, which isn't always seen through the various media platforms that are available to us. The idea is, for civic society and civic engagement, we're contributing ideas for a common good, so that we're trying to promote the work, and we are in that way actively involved in political and decision-making processes that are happening in and about in our communities. Now, this is obviously the thing that we hope for in the best of circumstances. And so what that would look like in many ways is, do we get involved in political reform? Do we volunteer? And certainly with the media, it's about fact-checking and understanding the information that's out there. When we look at, what's fair in our trades and in our jobs, all of that is a part of community building. And it steps us away not just from being the individual, but into looking at the systems around us and how it has impacted us. For small business owners, this is a very big deal, because if you are part of the civic society around you, then you're invested not just in the people and the communities, but you're interested in how to make the community highlighted and enhanced in different ways. It's about listening really and watching the things that are happening around and helping to fix it, participate in it, or engage in a way that is more about building not just your business within the community, but also about building the community within the business as well. So it's at a deeper level.
Dr.
Yes.
Good, just one quick
Sure.
note. When it comes to voting specifically, according to the PALCUS index survey that we've done twice now, we have a higher than average voting rate as a community, which is great. But one thing that we haven't tried to measure is how we engage in all these other ways of civic engagement. So I think that's a great maybe a way for us to expand our survey for the next time. Do you attend city hall meetings? Do you attend city council meetings? Do you have you ever attended a protest? Have you ever do you attend school board meetings? Those kinds of things, because like you said, civic engagement is all of those things, right? It's not just voting, but it's also, and it's not just running for office. It's all these things where you can contribute to the community. So I think that's a great point to make.
Yeah. And I think, and what I love about what you're saying is that it's, we tend to forget, we always think of things in these bigger picture ways of our communities. And we tend to forget about the smaller things, like the effectiveness of a library in our community, what that does to extend the thinking and the beliefs of people are just providing services, that's huge. And, in every community, we have a library. So yes.
And if there are Portuguese bilingual books in the library.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
Those kinds of things, right? So,
right, absolutely. I mean, if we think about even citizenship classes and you think about where people go to learn how to speak English, how to take those classes. I mean, I work in a school that actually has adult education during the day. So parents bring their kids to school, drop them off. We have, a community provided daycare center so parents can sit and learn and then take the citizenship the final piece for national, I'm going to say this incorrectly, but to receive their citizenship. So it's a huge, important piece. And that's why, the arts and culture of your community, when there are events that happen, in Connecticut, for example, there's a woman who writes a list, and every weekend you get an email thing where it tells you all the events that are happening in your community. Participating in those things is an act of civic duty as well in many ways, because you're adding to your own community by being a part of it, but you're also learning about other people and the things that they're doing as well. So it's really, really important, and it should always have been a function of ourselves, but over time we've seen that people have just not been as engaged. So I'm just to kind of add to that, this idea of political involvement is one thing, voting, campaigning, writing letters. I know that when the census was going out, PALCUS did a lot of work to get people to participate in the census. And that was very, very important because we want to see representation of the community there. So in essence, that's a social responsibility piece. Do you see yourself as part of the community and wanting it reflected in the way in which decisions are being made around you? It also adds to this idea of community research. What if there's something needed in the community? How do we actually see the gaps if we don't participate, and if we're never, ever socially involved? Association involvement, being a member of PALCUS or on a local level to your local community Portuguese foundations or clubs or whatever it may be. All of those things are part of civic engagement, and we don't tend to think of them as those extensions of ourselves. Philanthropic giving, advocacy and education, what we're doing here, why it's important to understand how much the media is a part of all of what we do. And now using the media as a voice to help us build civic engagement, that's incredibly important. So when we look at, the discernment of the media and understanding its impact, we also need to see if it has impact, what can we do to positively engage with the media to broaden our ideas and to broaden the scope. So the reason why this is such an important conversation is because, at my age, I've been, and probably you're all around the same age as me, we've all been involved to a certain degree. Like we had, school elections, we had, this idea of understanding the community. We understood who our mayors were, our first selectmen were, whatever your town and county, what was going on. But we know now that only 10% of students are regularly engaged in online civic participation. In fact, in any kind of civic participation, the one thing that is discussed here, especially in the United States, is the lack of involvement our youth have with, just any kind of civic work, whether it's voting. It's the one of in certain years they're high, and most years they're very, very low. Whether it's because we want to change something in the community, whether it's to just expand someone's thinking and an idea. This is why it's super important to understand where it is that we're going. And this was actually done by UC Riverside, and it shows really, not just that it's the things that we see in our real life every day, but even online, the engagement there is lacking completely, so that we don't actually have that expansion.
And so this is for youth students generally, and not just Portuguese students, right?
Correct.
So I'm sure we'll talk about, how do we give students opportunities and encourage them to be civically active, right?
Yes.
There could be a lot of opportunities that way, and it could be specific to the Portuguese community, or it could not, right?
But I also think that if we think of just within the communities themselves, what do we do on an everyday basis to talk about community? And some of that I think actually starts even in the home. Like, what does the home think of the community itself, and how do they engage in that way? And I will say, in many ways, the Portuguese community has always highlighted this by having their children go to Portuguese schools and being involved at the community from the beginning in that level, and then engaging in other activities and so forth. So beyond that, one of the things that I wanted to mention is that in UNESCO, which is the United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization, they really have seen this as one of the things that is part of the media and information literacy practice. What different laws that they believe in the sense of law, they mean sort of a law to society, really, of what is important in getting people to be involved more in communities. And their very first one, which I'm going to highlight here, says information communication libraries, media technology, the internet, as well as other forms of information providers are for use in critical civic engagement and sustainable development. They are equal in stature, and none is more relevant than the other, or such should be treated as such, or should be treated as such. And what that really means is that how do we, if we are intertwined with our media, and we are participants of as citizens in our world, one has impact on the other. And in terms of sustainability, in terms of what we want for the future, all of this is a part of what happens next, whether it's climate change, whether it's medicine, whether it's anything that we want to see grow and change in our communities. This is where this has value. And it's a worldwide, global push, because it's not just that we here in the United States are seeing civics undermined in different ways. Every country is seeing it by things like what happens with the freedom of the press, whether it's because there's something going on like a war such as the one that we're seeing in Ukraine. So a lot of this is being undermined in different ways, which is why its value is so important. I just wanted to mention, this is on a local level. So Boston has this civic media group that is always out there doing work. And so this kind of relates back to what you were saying about what can we do to get our students to be engaged. And a lot of it has to do with this inclusion and the idea of how do we get people together to build relationships, to consider the issues that are happening in the world. What are we missing? And this was designed by somebody who was at one of these conferences, where they really looked at, if there's an issue in a community, how do we systematically grow a body so that we can think about what is it that's in the media that can be connected, what kinds of models are working and not working, what's changed, and how do we keep connecting people in that way so that there's equity. And so this is mostly at a collegiate level, but taking it down to how do we start it at a younger level, that really comes back to why it is that the media is so much a part of the impact of every day. And I want to just kind of give you a glimpse of the impact, because this was done in 2020, and this is every minute of every day where they broke down how the different media groups out there and the hours of people who are engaged in these media spaces. So this was 2020, and you can see like the amount of things that were happening, the amount of packages being delivered from Amazon, TikTok, the views, Spotify, you name it. And then step it over to during, this is 2022, when they started looking at other things that people started to use, like Teams, like Zoom, like Slack. The amount of hours that people are invested in these spaces, that's where community happens to be right now. And so that actually makes us think about, well, if we think of civics, you know, not just as a individual level, but we look at it on a greater sphere, that brings us to why we need to start looking at digital citizenship from very early on, and also bridging it to when we're into adulthood. So with that, I just want to talk about this digital citizenship guide, and then I'm going to actually toss it to Vitor, who's going to talk about, this is the work that he's been really delving into in Portugal, so that this becomes a frame that we think about around the world, where we start to think about, you know, the idea of digital commerce, about how we are, who we are as individuals, digital etiquette in these spaces. We're in this places where we need to think about digital responsibility and digital security, obviously, and digital integrity, which I think is one of those things that gets missed along the way, even though it's super important, because if we live in these digital spaces, we need to be able to connect with people and also feel like there's a trust piece in here as well. So I'm going to toss this to Vitor Treman. I just wanted to mention that Vitor and I have been working on a book about the work that he has done in Portugal called Empowering Communities with Media Literacy, which will be coming out next month. But he really looks at it from the young until the youngest child. And so, Vitor, I'm going to stop sharing so you can get a chance to share some of that and what's happening in Portugal.
Okay, thank you, Verena. First, if you allow me, I would like to share a few slides about what is digital citizenship, and to explain what we are doing in Portugal, and which is the model that inspired us to develop this work that we are. We started in 2015 with very young children, their parents, students, and now we have a community project. But all the basis of this project is a model that is continues to be developed by the Council of Europe, and this model is called digital citizenship education. So, if possible, I would like to stress what is digital citizenship education from an European point of view, then the policies that are related with the competences for democratic culture and the DCE, the digital citizenship education, and then explain what is been doing in 17 countries, of course, try to focus on Portugal, okay? Regarding the definition, because there are a lot of different definitions about digital citizenship education, but one of them is inserted in the recommendation signed by the 46 members of the Council of Europe, and because before it were 47, but Russia left the Council of Europe after the starting of the war against Ukraine. But digital citizenship education, according to this recommendation, is related with empowerment. Empowerment, not only empowerment of our children, but of learners of all ages. Adults, it's a lifelong learning process, started from crib, and it's lifelong. And it's related with competencies that allow us to participate in digital society, having always in mind three pillars. These are the three pillars of the Council of Europe: human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. And this is important to keep it always present when we are in the cyberspace too. So, regarding the Council of Europe model, this model is the butterfly model, as you call it, but the official name is the Competences for Democratic Culture model. and is organized in values, attitudes, skills, knowledge, and critical understanding. If I may, every time we need to solve a problem, to make a decision, to act, to participate socially, we mobilize our values, our attitudes, skills, and knowledge. It's like we catch a wire from each of the four areas, and then we have the competence that we can exert to achieve a goal, to solve a problem, for instance. Uh, when we refer values, for instance, we are talking about human dignity or cultural diversity, or valuing democracy. The attitudes we can stress, for instance, respect, the tolerance of ambiguity, even the other, if the others have different ways of seeing the same phenomena that we are seeing. Okay, it's okay, we can understand that, but they should also understand our point of view. Then around skills, we have the flexibility and adaptability, the cooperation skills, working group, it's key, the plurilingual skills, and not only because especially in Europe, that's probably because we have a lot of different languages. It's important to know at least to how to speak 2 or 3 languages, the mother language plus 2. Then the analytical and critical thinking skills, it's key, not only about the media, it's about everything in our daily life, but media here, it's important to have the knowledge and the skills to critically analyze the media messages. And regarding knowledge, it's a knowledge that it's about ourselves, knowledge about language, knowledge about the world in its multiple sides, if you want to, from politics to history to media to environment and sustainability. This model was developed in 2016, and then in 2017, a series of books were published in order to help teachers, educators, and even people from NGOs or other that want to put this in practice, this model in practice. It presents the framework's background, how can we describe the model, and which are the most important competencies that a citizen should be able to develop. The second book focuses on the descriptors. This is the visible way. How can we show that we know? How can we show that we want to act? So the visible behavior, if you want. Then it describes how these descriptors and competence were developed. And a third one, it explains how we can use this model to plan activities in education following a strategy that is called the whole school approach. This means, for instance, if you are trying to develop an activity at school, it's key to involve not only the teachers and the students, but also the parents, the other community members, the school board, the other staff from school that is not teaching. And this is key because when we can involve everyone in an activity, this activity works better. This model is prospective, it's regarding the future, it's descriptive, so it's not a model that shows you or tells us what to do, but it gives us ideas to act, but we are free to adapt because it's key to important to adapt all these competencies and all these activities that are suggested to our local context, to our community context. The model is inclusive, it involves everyone, and is, as Belinha has just referred, is committed with the Sustainable Development Goals. In 2016, the Council of Europe started a project that's called Digital Citizenship Education. The base of this model is the butterfly model that we have just seen. And from this butterfly model, we organized 3 areas in which the citizen should be trained and its competencies must be improved. The first one in green, it's being online, for instance, and it's related with access and inclusion to media, how to learn and act creatively with media. It involves also media and information literacy. The second group is well-being online, and it involves ethics and empathy, the health and well-being, and the presence and communications, how to manage, for instance, our presence online. Then the third group, it's about rights online, and we have active participation, rights and responsibilities, privacy and security, and then consumer awareness. These 10 digital domains are key in the building, in the digital citizenship building. So the basis, we have the competencies for democratic culture, and on top, we have the 10 digital domains. In between, we need policies, actors, strategies, infrastructures and resources, and we need to assess/evaluate what we do, so we can improve what we are doing, so we can adapt to the real context. This is really important. Regarding policies, for instance, we have the recommendation that I have just referred a few minutes ago. For instance, Portugal signed this recommendation, and part of our educational policy in Portugal regarding media literacy and digital citizenship is perfectly in line with these models and with this recommendation. For instance, the actors that are developing digital citizenship education around Europe and in other countries, what they are doing is also in line with what we are doing in Portugal, not only at school level, but also regarding the work that is developed, for instance, by NGOs. It's not only at school, but also what the families could do, how the parents can act. And this is interesting because this way we can share practices, and we can discuss practices with other countries, not only inside our country. We can also know how to assess projects and practices. The strategies, for instance, we insist a lot in Portugal to develop activities that are considered project-based learning. It means that we have a problem, we identified an important problem, and it's important to work together in cooperation in order to find solutions, possible solutions for this problem. If the problem is not general but belongs to the community, usually we refer to that as a service learning. This is, we are working all together, following the whole school approach strategy in order to find a solution for a community problem. We have also resources available from the Council of Europe. Some of them are available in Portuguese to schools and also for trainers, and how to assess and evaluate practices and projects that we can develop. This is important. This way we have the 5 pillars. Regarding the action, okay. The countries that already in 2019 was really focused on digital citizenship education. So the Portuguese curricula was one of the 4. This was a study with several countries in Europe, and only 4, among them Portugal, had digital citizenship education as part of the school curricula. In 2022, in a study involving 17 European countries, the picture is completely different. But for instance, regarding preschool, only a country is really infusing digital citizenship education at this level. And this is why we tried, and me and Belinha are working with very young children since 2015 in a project that we are developing in Lisbon neighborhood. Anyway, in general, in Portugal, we have digital citizenship education and also, of course, media literacy as a transversal subject and as a subject. it's not a compulsory subject, but it exists in Portuguese curricula. And what types of activities are being developed? Not only activities developed by schools or the Ministry of Education, but by other institutions. At the curricular level, for instance, we have digital citizenship education in several subjects or infused in curricula. We are training teachers, other educators, even students, even parents, for instance, in San Marino. And this is really interesting because this is also that we are pursuing in Portugal. We want to do that. There are links with other projects. Some of them are developed by UNESCO and are multinational. Some projects are national or local. But it's interesting. For instance, this last one, the online project Digital Bridges, is a project that started during the pandemic time, during the lockdown, between a school in south of Portugal, in Olhão, and a school in Montenegro, in Kotor. And children are collaborating. They use the Zoom and other digital tools to cooperate and to discuss about important issues that they consider important issues. A lot of different events are being organized around Europe, meetings, celebrations, the DC days, for instance, and some products are also being produced, for instance, lesson plans for schools, digital content, and some TV programs, a lot of different translations. And to conclude, this is what we are really pursuing in our project with very young children. We try to develop holistic learning, having in mind the whole person in the context of everyday experiences. And that is why it's so important to develop community projects instead of going to a school and explain what they can do, and then we will leave school and that's all. That's not enough. It's important to follow the whole school approach, and it's important to take action. As Mike Riebel, one of the American researchers, well-known American researchers, says, it's important to evolve from literate users to fluent users. And this is one of the things that we are trying to develop with our project focused on very young children.
So just to, Angela, did you want to jump in there at all?
No, go right ahead.
Okay, so sorry, I'm going to go back to our full screen again so that I can come back to a few things. So in what Vitor is talking about, it's sort of this triangulation model of looking at things from family, schools, communities. And if you are a digital citizen, then you are a societal citizen. And that's the scope of why digital citizenship is a part of the discussion of civic engagement and civic society. So with that, I wanted to bring it to, civic duty, because we are at this point, and where do politics fit into this? And people will say, well, I'm not political. In fact, many times in the work of media literacy, we get a lot of people who say to us, well, media literacy is political. And I venture to say that it's not that media literacy is political, but we talk about issues that have political connotations or ramifications or, outcomes. And that's just the reality of the things that we see that are happening around the world. So in terms of, what is political activism or civic duty in this particular case, it's, an affiliation with a political organization, a contribution to a political cause, being a local board member, a community work, involvement in the community, campaign work, advocacy, and ultimately voting, which is something that I feel that if you are a citizen, is a part of your job to actually look at what's happening and participate, because ultimately what we see happening in the world around us is either because people have chosen to participate in their communities or the lack of participation. And so, right now, there was this piece that came out yesterday from Real Clear Politics about, the battle here in the United States for the Senate, certainly things that are happening in our the House elected piece as well. But if you don't vote, then you can't say or complain about the things that are happening, because those are choices that being made, and you should be participating even when it's difficult. And yesterday there was a piece that came out that I thought was really reflective of what happens when you start to lose interest in your community. And it is that this was from the New York Times, and it's voters see democracy in peril, but saving it isn't a priority. And that's a sad statement, really, of the world around us, that because of the things that people have seen characterized as a threat to democracy, people are no longer even interested and willing to actually vote. So the one thing I will say, and this was interesting that it came in this poll, was that its findings reinforce this idea that with midterm elections coming, the concern right now is very much about rising inflation and economic woes. And it doesn't matter what community that you're in. There are lots of things happening that really are concerning to people every single day. And I'm sure for all of us who heat our homes in the United States, we're all worried right now about what the cost of, the rising cost of oil will be and so forth. So this is one of those things will either activate people to vote or not to vote. And we tend to vote on two different levels, which is how we feel about things that are happening, or the monetary issues that we are seeing happening around us. So it's either social justice issues or economics. And in this case, I feel like in this time in our world, we have both happening simultaneously. So to really be active and to activate that civic engagement is to participate in this way. And I bring us back to this media bias chart, which I showed on the very first time that we were together. And the reason why is because we understand that we all come with biases. And hopefully this is through our second rotation of talking about media literacy and engagement, we understand that whether we think of it on the forefront, on the conscious level that we need to every day, we have beliefs and variations of that. And the media around us fill into those areas of need within our brain that fits the way we want to perceive information or believe about information. And so what I want to kind of end with in a way is this idea of how do we check ourselves to be civically engaged, if not by checking where we're getting our media sources. And so I always say this to my own students, and I say this often now to adults: if you watch one thing, watch the opposite, so that you can at least across the spectrum start to see the issues and the concerns that are being faced by communities, and the things that will possibly, and I say this possibly because we don't know what this midterm election will bring here in the United States, will get and motivate people to participate in their communities and in fact vote. And if it's not voting, what do we as individuals need to get people to be motivated and interested in the things that are happening around us? And so this is, sort of circling back to all the conversations that we've had even today and the last time about the value of media literacy, but one has to do with the other. And when we talk about digital citizenship, or we talk about media literacy, or we talk about civic engagement, we need to talk about ultimately who the individual is in our society. And that means being a participant of it. And so I'll leave it with us to have some questions if you have some that you want to throw with us, or but things that maybe people may have actually sent you.
Thank you so much. If we could, or if you want to do that slide or the slide before,
Sure.
I just think it's such an important slide, and for people to see. I know some of the logos are small and you can see them, but for example, Joe Rogan's podcast, who I listen to, right? He's now the most popular podcast in, I think, the world, if you will. Highly regarded as being very balanced and not going one way or the other. But to the point of this chart, there has been some very misleading information talked about on his podcast. So he's not like the place you go for facts.
Sure.
But with all of this, though, the thing that keeps coming into my mind is, how do you get people to engage, right? Do you give them a set of like tools? Do you give them a guide? Do you give them, for example, I was just thinking at our daughter's school, like this would be a great topic for a parent club meeting, right? And talking to parents about how you can talk to your kids about media literacy and what that means and what it means to be a digital citizen. But then the parents are going to need something to go back, like a conversation guide, or, here's a checklist, when you read something online, here's a checklist to validate whether or not it's, real or not, or if a valid source of information, that sort of thing. And Vitor, in your slides, there were a couple of areas where it said, there were resources for students themselves, but also teachers. I'm thinking that it would be great if, in our show notes, when we publish this on YouTube and the recording, have links to where people can get that. And then, is there a way to convert that into a guide for parents, if you will? Because again, I think, Belinia, you talked about this, that, parents have to be involved. You have to have the conversations at home. And I think, frankly, a lot of people just don't know how to start that conversation, right? And it's like, I don't want to talk to my kids about politics. Well, it's not about politics, right? It's about your kids online, your kids, either watching YouTube or maybe they're on Roblox or wherever they are, they're connected and they're going to be getting information. So how do you help them decipher whether or not that information is accurate or not? So I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on how do we provide some resources and get people more engaged in that area?
So I'm going to start first, but then I'll let Vitor, because I know there are resources that he has talked about, he'll talk about as well. So here's where I think, so the checklist thing, I think, is sort of a peripheral way of actually engaging. I think the most important way is when you find an issue that's very personable to people. And that's how you actually get them to look at information. And the reason why I say that is because, I just was actually listening with both Vitor and I were at a conference earlier that was happening in Brussels. And there was a lot of talk about, well, we do this and we do that. And this is supposed to be a life skill. So how do you develop a life skill if every year someone gives you a check and says, oh, just check this, right? So it's really about this idea of internalizing what it is that you're seeing for information. And the best way is to meet people where they're at. So what is it in the community that is really affecting people? And whether it's, let's take it to, something that's, let's just talk about even the PALCUS census, for example. The reason why we do the PALCUS census is so that we can show how important the Portuguese community is, right? Mm-hmm. Why is that important? What does it offer to people? If you are on a census, it's connected to money. What does money do for your community? So it's literally going down the litany. And what does that money do for your business? What does that do for your school? How does that impact that? And then what kinds of services are provided to that? What's missing from your community that is super necessary for you to keep moving forward? And I think those are the things that then you can say, well, if this is a big deal, then why is the media not covering it? Why is the media not watching this? And why is the focus always on this? And why do we blame all these other external things? Because I think, we fall into these traps. And certainly, look, with all of this media, I also say that we get very little media. And it's because a lot of stories are repeated over and over and over and over again, as if we're all interested just in those 5 or 6 stories. And that's problematic because there's much more going on in people's lives than is represented by the mass media in front of us. And I think that's, for me, when I engage and when I talk to students about things, we start getting to the very personal pieces of it. And you'll forgive me if I said this to you last time when we did this together, but I had a conversation with students about trust in my class. And I believe we did talk about this a little bit. And I said to them, like, where is trust important to you? And it was all the way down to the relationships, right? So what kinds of relationships do you want to have? And I think this thing about opting out, like the unfriending, is about the lack of relationship. Because be in a relationship, you actually have to see the good and the bad. I'm not saying that you stay in the middle of things when like things are horrendous. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that if you and I are really friends, then we can agree to disagree and still be friends.
Mhm.
We have more in common than we actually not have in common.
Right.
But the problem is that we don't get that to that point. And just one very quick thing, there's a StoryCorps, that is something that's a national organization that they basically collect stories about people and they put them in a room together to tell stories. Which has been a phenomenal thing because they actually collect a lot of history. But they did something a little different. They asked people to participate in stories without saying anything about their political views. And when they put people together in the room, what they found was that if you had kids, you went to your kids, the things that worry you about your kids, such a personal part of you. If you had ailing parents, people went to the thing about their ailing parents. It wasn't about all the stuff. And there's another
Right.
word I use, but I can't use. It's the stuff that's out there that seems like we're all so angry about, when it really comes down to, am I going to have food on the table? Am I going to have money to pay for oil this winter? Is there other things that are happening? I'm really worried about my child being bullied online, which is where I think the digital citizenship piece especially comes in. And why is that happening? Because it would only be happening if we knew how to actually talk to people, and we haven't figured out how to do that.
Right.
And I'm going to stop talking so Vitor can jump in. Sorry, Vitor.
No, it's perfect. It's okay. You're right, and I fully agree with you. But let me just add, I think to engage, first to engage not only young people, but children and young people, and of course adults too, but focusing now on adults and young people. It's important to hear from them what they think it's important. For instance, for us in general, for us adults or people from my age, that I'm 50s, the main problems now are maybe economy, war, disinformation. But when we talk with children, the main problems are hunger, climate change, poverty, quality education. So we have different ways of looking to the same world. And so I think to engage them, it's important to give them opportunities. Uh, and this means they can identify problems, even if they are not able or won't be able to solve the problems, they can look for possible solutions. This way, they work together, they do some research, they learn by doing, and they are involved. They have an objective. They want to reach an objective or an achievement. And this is important because this way of acting makes them thinking critically. And like the UNESCO, the one book that UNESCO published, it's the curriculum for teachers in 2021. The main title is Think Critically, Click Wisely. And this is important when they have the opportunity to think about reality, not only to answer academic tests and to reproduce things that they heard from their teachers, but using their own ideas, using these ideas. I think this can engage them. Regarding the resources, of course, I will share all the links, even the links that are in Portuguese. And regarding parents, the Council of Europe organized a poll with 21,000 parents in Europe about digital citizenship, what they are worried about and what they would like to have available to work or to talk and to act with their teachers. And these results will be published very soon, but I will share it also with you. And some products that have been developed specifically for parents, and some of them I think they are already in Portuguese. I will share the links in to the Portuguese versions and to the English version.
That'd be great. I'm curious, when you said the concerns of young people or climate change, hunger, what was the age group? Because I think of my daughter's age group. She's 9. I don't know that she would think of those things at this point. I think she's much more concerned about whether or not her friends are all getting along and, you know, things like that. So I'm curious what the age group was for that.
Yes, it depends. This age group was primary school and middle school in some
Interesting.
European countries.
Wow.
Maybe, and let me just precise, maybe they didn't say climate change, but they say, okay, forests, or we don't have enough water, because now, for instance, in Portugal, that's a huge problem because we don't have enough water to drink, and it's a huge problem, and it's related to climate change. So even if they don't say the correct term or the term that we are expecting, they refer to.
Got it.
But I actually think that's also an interesting comment that you're making, Angela, because I think and there's not enough time for this conversation, but, you know, on a worldwide perspective, our children see things differently. And I think our European children see things very differently than our US children. And it has a lot more to do with the fact that I think they have different communities, and I'm talking like different countries with different problems sitting right next to them. And they've most affected in ways. We're very much separated from the rest of the world by two big oceans. And so, you know, we tend to not think about some of the global issues I think that our European counterparts really do delve into.
It's a great point, and kind of goes back to what I said earlier about, I think a lot of people want to shield their kids from political issues, and their kids, let them be kids, and they don't need to be worrying about these kinds of things. And you know, I will admit I sort of feel that, but then I also feel like, but then they're going to join the world at some point, and they need to know what's going on, right? So yes, we don't need to freak them out and make them feel like the world is, you know, going to end because of climate change, but teaching them how to be responsible about those sort of things, and that other countries aren't so blessed as we are, right? So I think it's a great point. This webinar, we could talk about this for another few hours, which is why we have a future series, right?
Yes,
we have at least 3 more series and webinars in this series. So I'm very excited. Thank you so much, both of you. We look forward to the next one. And we will put those resource links in the show notes, and perhaps even, you know, drop them into a newsletter and push them out to everybody so that people can actually utilize them. And would love to get people's feedback on, did you utilize them and how did it go? And, you know, what did you think about them? And so that would be great. And in fact, maybe we could do like a sort of like a town hall, virtual town hall meeting on these topics. That would be like fascinating, awesome. Right? Excellent. Well, thank you both very much. This has been fascinating and so needed for our community. I appreciate the work that you're doing. Thanks to everybody who out there joined us for the session, whether you joined us live or you're watching the recording. Would love to hear your feedback. So if you have some thoughts on what you heard today, please send an email to palcus@palcus.org, and we would love to have you join the conversation. And until next time, thank you very much. And until the next series.
Yes, next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.